This is question 3 from the 2016 TSA paper. In this question we're asked which option best expresses the flaw in the argument. So let's quickly look through this argument. First, it says that researchers have found brain differences between people who get up early and people who go to bed late. And in the argument, these are referred to as larks, people getting up early, and owls, people going to bed late. So that's the language we'll use in the rest. It gives percentages: 10% of people are larks, 20% are owls, and the rest are in between. And then it says the brain differences might help explain why the owls seem to be at greater risk of depression. So this is mostly pointing out the fact that the owls have a greater risk of depression, and it's also suggesting that the rest of the information will explain this. It says that scans have shown owls have less white matter in brain areas associated with depression. So it explains what white matter is, but it doesn't really matter for this argument because that isn't used in the rest of the argument. And then finally it says night owls should try to adjust their sleep patterns to avoid mental health problems. So you see, the first 4 sentences are all facts about what's been discovered, and then this last sentence is saying night owls should do something based on that information, so it's clear that's going to be the conclusion of the argument. So now let's think about what could be a flaw in this argument, what could undermine drawing this conclusion on the basis of these 4 pieces of evidence. Well, one common flaw is an assumption, especially an assumption about causation. And in particular, we look out for that when the conclusion says we should do something to get some benefit. And here the conclusions of the form night owls should adjust their sleep patterns in order to improve their mental health. And whenever we conclude something like that, we're assuming that the changing your sleep patterns will cause your mental health to improve. So we're looking for an assumption about causation, but that's a likely source of a flaw. So let's look through the options and see if any of them corresponds to that. Okay, so here are my 5 options, and I've written down the conclusion so we can compare. And we said we're looking for a potentially causal statement, and the only option that mentions causation is C. C says that the argument assumes that changing your sleep pattern will cause a change in the quality of your white matter. So the argument, this conclusion doesn't directly reference white matter, but the argument was that white matter in certain areas of your brain is associated with depression. So if the argument is that you should change your sleep to improve your mental health, to avoid depression, in order for that to work, then changing your sleep needs to change the white matter in your brain because that's what was associated with depression. So it looks like this is a causal assumption that the argument's making, and since this isn't argued for, that assumption is a flaw. If this assumption were wrong, then the argument would fail. So it looks like this is the flaw. Let's just rule out the other options quickly. A says it ignores the brains of people who aren't larks or owls. Well, the argument explicitly refers to those people, and what happens to people who aren't owls isn't relevant to what owls should do, so that's not going to be a flaw. B says it ignores the fact that depression is a common affliction in the population. Well, firstly, this is a factual statement that's being ignored, and normally facts don't correspond to flaws. And secondly, it doesn't matter how common depression is to what you should do to try to avoid it. So it's not going to be a flaw. D says it implies night owls would want to change their sleep patterns. Well, this isn't about what owls want, it's about what they should do. So that's not going to be a flaw. And E says it associates depression with other mental health problems. Well, it's true it refers to mental health in general here, but if you're avoiding depression, then you're avoiding one kind of mental health problem. So you would be avoiding some mental health problems. So that doesn't prevent the argument from going through. So here we can see that C is indeed the answer.